Hello, welcome to another edition of my C# for Beginners series. I'm Sarah Payne, and today's video is going to be covering user input in C#. At its very simplest level, we can do this in a single line of code. So we're going to start by defining the type, as we always do. So we're going to set that to string, because user input coming from the console is always a string. To avoid warnings in the IDE, we're going to add a question mark. That just means that we're accepting null and empty strings. I'm going to call the variable we're going to store the string as user input. And then it's console.readline with a semicolon on the end. So just to reiterate what we've done, we've set a type. We've declared a variable called user input as this type string, and then we are assigning the return of this function, which will be whatever's typed at the keyboard. So if I do a console.writeLine user input, and I'm going to add a little section in front of it to make it clear. If I could type, it would help. User typed. And then we're going to output, so we'll output the word user typed, colon, space, and then whatever the user types. So I'm going to run that now. Oh, it says please enter a number. Well, I'm not, I'm entering a word because I forgot to update that bit. I typed something. So we can see what it's done. It says I enter a number because I forgot to change that text. Then it says I type something. Let's just change that quickly now. Text and press enter. Okay, so as promised, I'm going to demonstrate this in multiple different IDEs. So what you've just been looking at is Rider. And it was actually running under Linux. I'm just going to switch over quickly to Visual Studio. So I've put exactly the same code in. I'm going to run that. And we can see we've got the same kind of result. The only real difference is it's opening that window. And if I was working in VsCode, I can do something almost identical. Get rid of that second comment line because it's not needed. So run. Enter some text, type a number. Some text, press enter. So we see the IDE use is very slightly different, but the experience is actually pretty much the same across the board. Okay, so we know so far how to get a user input. We know how to assign it to a variable. But generally, we want to do other things. You know, for example, if we want to convert that to a number, we have to parse it. Now, the simple way of parsing something is another one line of code. And I'll do it first because then I want to show you what the problems with this are. So if I do set an integer value, and we're going to call it numInt, just so we can see what's going on. And this time we're going to do want to do parse first. int.parse user input. It's going to give me a warning because that could be a null reference because I'm allowing nulls. We'll ignore that for now. And again, if I wanted to do something into a double instead, num double equals double dot parse user input. Console dot write line, num integer, and console dot read line. Oops, sorry, write line. Num double. Okay, so what happens if I run this? $10. So we've got that the user typed in 10, and then we've got these two output correctly. So that's worked. But watch what happens if I slip with the keyboard and I do that. We've got an unhandled exception because it doesn't know how to do that. Or what happens if somebody says to type in 10? Again, it doesn't work. Let's just update that to make that really clear what we're doing. Please enter a number. Because again, we don't know actually whether the user, what the user's inputting. You know, I mean, I've asked for a number. It's not been totally clear. What happens if I put 10.9? We've got the exception. And that's because this one's first. If I just comment out that line, actually. Because it can do that. It can convert it to a double, but it can't convert it to an integer. So we've got a way of doing it, but actually it's not very good because users aren't notoriously bad at making typing mistakes or not responding in the way we expect them to. So instead of int.parse, what we have is a function called int.tryparse. We're still passing user input. The difference is instead of it returning a number, it returns a bool. And this tells us whether the conversion from text to integer has been successful. If that is successful, this value will become true. If it's not, it will become false. And then this bit here will be explained in far more detail in a later video. However, for now, just understand that the successfully passed number is accessible through that variable there. If it's not successful, it will just be a default value of 0. So let's replace this one as well. Bool is double equals double dot try parse, again user input, comma out, we set the type and then we set the name. And you can see that these two are still working. They're not underlined. That's because they've got outputs from here. So let's try one that works first. So I want 10. So the user typed 10 and both of these have output as 10. What happens if I do one that doesn't work? Oh, but we've still got these outputs, and that's because that's really still working with the default value. Let's make this a little bit better. Let's make this a little bit easier to read. So, console.writeLine. is integer, add a space, okay, so all we've done, I've added 2 more lines of code. It's going to output is integer, and then it's going to output the value here and here. Now this time I'm going to put a breakpoint in as well. So enter a number. Let's start with one that works. It's 10. Step in. Oh, we can see that's been assigned true. Step in again, that's true. If I hover over here, we can see that these are outputting what you'd expect. And we've got the consoles here that's now output this line, and we'll finish with the last 2. So I'll do that one more time, this time where what we're looking at is a false answer. So let's do a 10. We can see this time these are both false. And we can see the false here and here as well. So this time the output's going to tell us it's false because that's what we set, and then the last 2 lines will return our zeros again. Now I did say that I was going to demonstrate everything in multiple IDEs, so let's do that now. We'll start with Visual Studio, so hit the right screen. Oh, I forgot to delete the first line of text, did I? Whoops. Yes, I did. Okay. Right, so use type 10, integer. We can see it's exactly the same. And what I am just going to do is just reduce down the size of the Visual Studio window for a minute. I don't want it to reduce it too much, just enough for a demonstration. Because if I run this a different way, we can't see the debug process in Visual Studio as well. So in Visual Studio it's very similar but not quite the same, because in Rider and Visual Studio Code we'd be left clicking over here and that doesn't work. We have to right click, set a breakpoint. Once we've done that, it comes over here, we enter the number, that's 10, and then it stops. And then we get the options here. So we've got step into, step over. We can see that these values are still clearly being set. Where you see the information is a little different, but these are aesthetic differences. It's still essentially working in exactly the same way. And similarly, if I go across to VS Code, just copy that code in, save myself a bit of time. I can set my breakpoint. And then I've got that running from before. So if I run, this time I'm going to start with debugging. Slightly different place, very similar symbols though. So I'm going to start by entering our number, which was 10. And 1 second, so let me check why that hasn't worked. Okay, after a short piece of investigation, this is a specific issue in VS Code with taking user input from the terminal. I will update my using VS Code blog and video later to incorporate this once I've established how to correct it, but it's universal across a lot of languages in VS Code. I will come back to that. The code is still absolutely correct from the demo. It's working in Visual Studio and it's working in Rider. It is a multi-language problem with VS Code that I will come back and correct at a later date. Right, so finally we've got most of what we need. To take this further, to really fix this so that we're not dealing with this 0-0 problem here if somebody types in a silly answer, we need to use selection. The next video will be entirely on selection, but just for now I'm going to give a quick demonstration of what I mean. This is just to end the video in a really clear way. So if is integer, which is exactly the same as saying that. So if is integer is true, console.writeLine user input plus can be passed to an integer, else console.writeLine user input cannot be passed to an integer. Okay, so we can do the same for if is double, console.writeLine user input plus cannot be passed to an integer. Oops, I put cannot be, I should say can. Else console.writeLine user input passed to a double. Okay, so change the breakpoint to there, debug, enter a number 10. We've come to the new selection. This is true, so it comes in here, and it does that one. It comes down, checks if it's double, it is, so it comes in here, and we output. Okay, and that was the console. So one more time. User just had to type in 10 like that. This is now evaluated to false. We've got the first bit done, so when we step in, it comes into the else, and again it will come into the else because that was also false. I'll be covering selection completely in the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.